The rain had been falling since dawn, a thin grey rain that soaked the moors of Northumberland and turned the paths of Ashwold Hall into ribbons of mud. Lady Vivian Ashcombe stood at the edge of the east lawn with her bow in her hand and her quiver at her hip. She was 22 years old. She had come to Ashwold 3 months ago as its new mistress, and no one at Ashwold believed she would stay. The old butler had said it first. She had heard him in the corridor on the morning after her arrival, when she had gone down to the kitchens looking for a cup of hot water and a piece of bread. She had stopped outside the pantry because his voice was pitched low and steady, the way a man speaks when he means every word. "She won't last," he had said. "Mark me, Mrs. Belden, a season, perhaps 2. She has soft hands and a soft manner, and no ground beneath her feet. His Grace will bury her the way he buried the last one, only this one will not need burying. She will simply be gone." Mrs. Belden had made a small sound that was neither agreement nor protest. "She won't last," the butler had repeated. "I have been at Ashwold 41 years. I have seen every kind of woman come through this door. I know the ones who stay and I know the ones who do not. She does not." Vivian had held very still in the corridor. She had not felt the cold of the flagstones through her slippers, though the cold was there. She had heard the words and set them down inside her, the way one sets down a stone. Then she had walked to the kitchens, asked for her hot water, thanked the scullery girl by name and gone back upstairs. That had been 3 months ago. The rain today was the same rain that had fallen the morning she arrived. The house was the same house. The people were mostly the same people, though a few had begun to look at her differently, and a few still did not look at her at all. She drew the bow slowly. Her arms were sore. She had been practicing every morning since April, on the field behind the orchard where the yew trees hid her from the windows. She had told no one she was practicing. Her arrows were older than she was, made by her grandfather in a country house in Wiltshire, and she had brought them with her in a plain wooden case that no one had thought worth opening. The stag was at the far edge of the field. It stood between 2 elms, half in shadow, its head lowered to the grass. She had watched it for 4 mornings. The huntsman had said it was old and would be culled before winter. She had asked if she might take it herself, and the huntsman had looked at her for a long moment before he had said, "As your ladyship wishes." He had not believed she would. She held the bow steady. Her breath came out in a small white cloud, because the rain had cooled the air and the wind off the moor was sharp. She smelled wet grass and wet leaves and, faintly, the smoke from the kitchen chimney behind her. She smelled the oil she had rubbed into the bowstring the night before. She smelled her own damp wool, and beneath it the lavender her maid had folded into her sleeves. She drew. The string bit into the leather of her glove. She sighted along the shaft. She waited for the stag to lift its head. Then a boy walked out from between the elms. He was carrying a bundle of kindling on his back. He was perhaps 12 years old, thin as a reed, with a face that had not yet decided whether it would be handsome. She did not know his name. She had seen him twice in the stable yard and once in the kitchen doorway, and she had said good morning to him each time. And he had bowed each time without speaking. He belonged to the household, but the household was large, and she did not yet know all its edges. She saw him step into the line of the arrow. She tried to release the tension without loosing the shaft. She twisted her wrist, opened her fingers, tried to let the bow down slowly. But the string had been drawn to its full weight, and her arms were tired, and the rain had made the leather of her glove slippery. The arrow slipped. It flew. She heard the sound she had heard 100 times on the practice field, the small dry hiss of feathers cutting air. She heard it, and knew what she had done before her eyes could catch it. The stag lifted its head at the sound and bounded away. The boy took another step. The arrow struck him in the shoulder, hard enough to spin him half around, and he dropped the kindling in a slow tumbling fall, and went down after it, into the wet grass. For a moment she could not move. She was aware only of the rain, and of her own heartbeat, which had become very loud, and of the taste of iron at the back of her mouth. Then she was running. She ran across the field with the bow still in her hand. She did not remember dropping her quiver, though later she would find it in the grass where she had left it. She ran, and the mud sucked at her slippers, and the hem of her gown grew heavy with water. She reached him. He was lying on his side. The arrow was in his shoulder, high near the collarbone. There was blood, but not a great deal of it. because the shaft was still in the wound and the wound was still closed around it. His face was very white. His eyes were open. He was looking at her. "My lady," he said. "Do not speak," she said. She knelt in the mud beside him. She set the bough down. She put her hand against his cheek. His skin was cold and wet, and beneath the cold she could feel him trembling. "Do not speak, do not move, be still, be still." "My lady, I did not see." "Hush," she looked at the shaft. She had been taught, years ago by an old huntsman in her father's country, that you did not pull an arrow out. You broke the shaft close to the wound, and you carried the person to a surgeon. But there was no surgeon at Ashwold. The village doctor was 3 miles away in Belford. The nearest man with any skill in wounds was the huntsman himself, whose cottage was on the other side of the orchard. "What is your name?" she said. His lips moved. "Tom, my lady. Tom Aldridge. Tom," she said. "Tom, listen to me. I am going to lift you. It will hurt. I am sorry. I am so sorry." She did not call for help. She did not think of calling for help. The house was a 1/4 of a mile away across the wet field, and the wind was carrying her voice the wrong way, and by the time anyone came the boy would be colder than he was now. She put one arm under his knees and one arm under his back, careful of the shaft, and she lifted. He was not heavy. He was 12 years old and thin, and she was a tall woman and stronger than she looked, but he was still a boy, and she was still a woman in a wet gown carrying him across a field in the rain. She began to walk. He made a sound against her shoulder, not a cry, a small hurt sound, the sound a child makes when he is trying not to make any sound at all. "I know," she said. "I know. Not far." "Not far, Tom." The mud pulled at her feet. The hem of her gown wound about her ankles. Her arms began to burn before she had gone 100 yards. She did not stop. She walked with her chin lifted and her eyes on the roof of the great house, and she counted her steps under her breath, because counting was something she had always done when a thing was hard, and because the counting kept her from thinking about the shaft in his shoulder and the blood on her sleeve. Someone saw her from the terrace. She did not know who. She saw a figure move at the edge of the balustrade and then vanish, and then she saw the great doors of the south front open, and figures spilling down the steps, and among them the tall black-coated figure of her husband. The Duke of Ashwold was 36 years old. He was a man built without waste. He was not handsome in any of the ways drawing rooms called handsome, but when he walked into a room, servants shifted without knowing they had shifted, and conversations quieted without knowing they had quieted. His name was Alistair Ravenscross, and he had married Vivienne in February because his father had promised his father, and because he had needed the settlement, and because he had not cared enough about any other woman to refuse. He reached her before any of the others. He did not speak. He looked at the boy in her arms and at the shaft in the boy's shoulder, and at the blood on her sleeve, and then at her face. "Give him to me," he said. No, he stopped. She had never said no to him before. She had said yes and I will and as you wish and very well, but she had not said no. He looked at her, and the rain fell between them, and for a long moment neither of them moved. "He is heavy," Alistair said. "He is mine to carry," she said. "I shot him. I will carry him." She saw something flicker across his face. She did not know what it was. She did not have time to know. She walked past him, still carrying the boy, and he turned and walked beside her, close, one hand hovering near her elbow without touching, ready to catch her if she stumbled. They walked together across the last 100 yards to the house. The servants parted for them. The old butler, whose name was Mr. Renton, stood at the top of the steps with his mouth open a little, and closed it as they came up. "Send for Dr. Weathers," Alistair said. "Send Godfrey on the bay. Now, have the blue room made ready. Have hot water. Have clean linen. Have the fire lit in the hearth and the shutters closed. Your Grace, the blue room is now—" Renton, the butler, bowed and moved. The house began to move around them. Vivienne carried the boy through the great hall, past the portraits of Alistair's grandfathers, past the tall clock that struck the hours in a voice like a low bell, and up the wide oak staircase to the second floor. Her arms shook. She did not let them shake enough to be seen. The blue room was at the end of the east corridor. It was one of the finest guest chambers in the house. It had a great tester bed hung with pale blue silk, and a fire that a housemaid was already lighting when they came in. Vivienne laid the boy down on the counterpane. She did not care about the counterpane. Alistair did not tell her to care. She knelt by the bed. She began to unbutton the boy's coat, careful of the shaft. Her fingers were shaking now that she had put him down, and she could not make them stop. "Let me," said a voice behind her. Mrs. Belden, the housekeeper, had come in. She had a basin of water and a stack of clean cloths. She knelt beside Vivienne without waiting for permission, and her hands were steady where Vivienne's were not. "Your ladyship has done well," she said quietly. "You have done well. Sit back a moment. Breathe." Vivienne did not sit back. She stayed where she was, one hand on the boy's uninjured shoulder, the other on his forehead. He had closed his eyes now. His breath was shallow but even. His skin was still very cold. "He is called Tom Aldridge," she said. "He is 12. His mother? Does he have a mother? Does anyone know? He is Molly Aldridge's boy from the laundry, my lady. His mother is here in the house. I have sent for her." "Good," said Vivienne. "Good." Alistair stood at the foot of the bed. He had not moved since the doctor was sent for. He was watching her, not the boy. Vivienne did not turn to look at him. She kept her hand on the boy's forehead and she waited. The rain went on falling against the window. Dr. Weathers came at last, sooner than she had thought possible, his coat still dark with wet. He was a small square man with pale hair and pale eyes and hands that were very clean. He looked at the boy. He looked at the shaft. He looked at Vivienne, still on her knees by the bed with mud on her gown and blood on her sleeve, and he did not ask her to leave. "The shaft is not deep," he said. "It has struck the flesh above the bone and no farther. That is a mercy. If your ladyship will remain, I will need another pair of steady hands. I will remain." "Your Grace," the doctor said to Alistair, "with respect, this is not a sight for—" "She is remaining," said Alistair, "because she asked to remain. I will fetch and carry." The doctor bowed his head a fraction and set out his instruments on a cloth. He worked for the better part of an hour. Vivienne held the boy's uninjured hand. When the shaft came free at last, Tom made the same small sound he had made in the field, and Vivienne bent her head close to his ear and murmured to him, "Count with me, Tom. Count the tiles on the ceiling with me. 1, 2, 3. And he tried, and she counted with him until the doctor had bound the wound and set the sling and stood up. "He will live," Dr. Weathers said. "The shoulder will be stiff for some months. He will need to be kept from labor until the spring. He will need warmth and broth and quiet. He will have all three," said Vivienne. She had not moved from her knees. Her back and her arms were now burning with a slow, deep pain, and the mud on her gown had begun to dry, and the blood on her sleeve had darkened to a color that was almost black. She did not stand until the boy's mother came in. Molly Aldridge was a small woman with red hands and a face that had been prepared for the worst, and when she saw her son asleep on the great bed with his shoulder bound, she went so pale that Vivienne rose at last and caught her under the elbow. "He will live," Vivienne said. "He will live, Mrs. Aldridge. The doctor has said so." "Your ladyship, I shot him," Vivienne said. "It was I who shot him. It was my arrow. I did not see him step out from the trees. I have done a terrible thing, and I will not pretend I have not. I will pay for his care, all of it, and while he is mending he will stay in this room and be tended as though he were my own child. And when he is well, he will not go back to the kindling. He will go to whatever work he wishes, and if he wishes no work, he will still be kept. Do you hear me?" Molly Aldridge had begun to cry, quietly, into her apron. She nodded. "Do you hear me?" Vivienne said again, because she needed to be certain the woman had heard. "I hear you, my lady." "Good," said Vivienne. "Good, now sit with him. Mrs. Belden will bring you tea. If he wakes, send for me at once, at any hour. I will be within call." She turned. She had to hold the bedpost for a moment because the room was tilting a little. Then she walked out of the blue room and down the corridor, and only when she had reached her own dressing room did she close the door behind her and press her hand against the wood and breathe, once, deeply in and out, before she began to unbutton her ruined gown. Alistair had followed her as far as the corridor. He stood there for a long time after she had shut the door. He did not knock. He looked at the wood of the door as though it were a country he had never visited, and after a while he turned and went down the stairs. That evening he sat in his study alone. The fire was high. The rain had not stopped. On the desk in front of him was a book he was not reading, and a glass of brandy he had not touched. He was thinking. He was thinking about the moment he had come out onto the terrace and seen her crossing the field. He had not known at first what he was seeing. A woman in a soaked gown carrying something. Then he had understood that it was the boy she was carrying, and that the arrow in the boy was her arrow, and that she was walking as though nothing in the world would stop her from reaching the house. He was thinking about the words she had said to him. "He is mine to carry." He was thinking about the 3 months since she had come to Ashwold, and about all the things he had not noticed. She had asked the huntsman to teach her the names of the estate hounds. She had learned every scullery girl's Christian name within a fortnight. She had rearranged the kitchen garden without disturbing old Marston, who had been kitchen gardener for 30 years and would have quarrelled with anyone who ordered him. She had done this by asking his advice on every plant and by taking it, so that Marston believed the new arrangement had been his own idea, and boasted of it. Alistair had thought of these things, when he had thought of them at all, as pleasant. He had not understood what he was watching. He had watched a woman quietly, without announcement, take hold of a house that had been running by inertia since his mother died, and he had assumed she was simply being agreeable. He had also, he now remembered, said something to Renton in April. He had said it in passing, over a glass of port after dinner, when Renton had asked whether the new mistress might wish to make any changes to the household. Alistair had said, "Without cruelty, without much thought at all, she will not be here long enough to change anything. She won't last. Renton, let her arrange her flowers and leave the rest." He had said that. He had said those words. He had forgotten saying them, but he had said them, and Renton had heard them, and Renton had repeated them, in his own way, in his own words, in a corridor outside a pantry on a morning in February. Alistair set down the book he had not been reading. He picked up the brandy. He did not drink it. He set it down again. In the corridor above him, in the blue room. His wife was sitting by the bed of a stable boy with a wound she had made in his shoulder, and she was reading aloud to him from a book of country tales in a voice so quiet Alistair could not hear it, though he strained to. He had, he realized, been very stupid. The next morning was clear. The rain had stopped in the night. The sun rose over the moor and struck the wet stones of Ashwold Hall until they steamed. Vivienne was awake before the sun. She had slept perhaps 3 hours. She had gone into the blue room twice in the night, once at midnight and once at 4, and both times Tom had been asleep and Molly had been beside him with a candle and a mug of cooling tea. At 7 she went down to the kitchens. She asked for a tray. She asked for 2 eggs boiled soft and a piece of buttered toast cut into fingers and a bowl of broth kept warm on the range. The cook, who was called Mrs. Pell, made the tray without a word of complaint, though it was outside all her usual hours. Vivienne carried the tray up the back stairs herself. She spent the morning in the blue room. Tom woke at 9. He was in pain, and he was frightened, but he ate the eggs, and he drank half the broth, and he let her read to him until he fell asleep again. At noon Dr. Weathers came back and unwound the bandage and rebound it, and pronounced himself satisfied. At 3 she went down at last to change her gown. She met Alistair on the landing. He had been coming up. She had been coming down. They both stopped. She thought he looked tired. She thought perhaps he had not slept either. "How is the boy?" he said. "He will live. He ate this morning. I have written to Dr. Ramsay in Edinburgh. He is the best man on gunshot and arrow wounds in the north. I have asked him to come." Vivienne looked at him. "That is not necessary. Dr. Weathers has said—" "I know what Dr. Weathers has said. I would rather have 2 opinions than 1. The cost is nothing." She thought about this for a moment. Then she nodded. "Thank you. You do not need to thank me. I know I do not need to. I am doing it anyway." He almost smiled. She saw the corner of his mouth move, and then still itself again. "Vivienne," he said. It was the first time he had used her name since the day of their wedding. "May I come to the Blue Room this evening? I should like to see the boy." She was surprised. She did not show it. "He is your servant. You do not need my leave to see him. I am asking your leave anyway." "Then yes. Come at 7. He will be awake and he will be less afraid if there is someone he knows with him." He nodded once and stood aside to let her pass, and she went down the stairs. And he went up. He came at 7. He sat in the chair by the bed, and he spoke to Tom Aldridge in a voice Vivienne had never heard him use, a voice low and steady, the voice of a man speaking to a boy who was frightened and did not wish to show it. He asked Tom about the horses in the stable. He asked which was Tom's favorite. He listened to the answer as though it were the most interesting thing that had been said to him all week. When Tom's eyes began to close, Alistair rose without fuss and set the chair back in its place and left the room. In the corridor outside, Vivienne stood waiting. "Thank you," she said. "I did nothing. You spoke to him as though he were a person. You did not have to do that." Alistair looked at her for a long moment. The candle on the wall bracket was behind her, and the light caught the edge of her hair and made a soft brown line of it. He noticed this and set it aside as one of many things he was not going to speak of yet. "Good night," he said. "Good night." She went to her own room. He went to his. The corridor between them was 50 feet long. The days settled into a shape. Tom Aldridge mended slowly. Dr. Ramsay arrived from Edinburgh on the 4th day, examined the boy, praised Dr. Weather's work, and returned to Edinburgh. The Blue Room became Tom's room. His mother slept in a truckle bed beside him. Vivienne came in every morning and every evening, and often at midday as well. The staff began to look at her differently. It was not sudden. It was not a single moment. It was small things. The way Mrs. Pell in the kitchen began to ask her opinion on the dinner menu, the way the stable lads bowed a little lower and held her horse a little steadier, the way Marston in the garden began to walk beside her when she passed, unasked, as though it were his right to. She did not remark on any of this. She did not point it out to Alistair. She did not point it out to herself. She simply went on doing what she had been doing all along. Renton, the butler, was slower to change. He was a proud man and an old one, and he had said what he had said, and he could not unsay it. But he watched. He watched her carry a bowl of broth up the back stairs at 7 in the morning. He watched her sit up with Tom Aldridge one night when the boy's fever spiked, holding a cold cloth to his brow for 3 hours without complaint. He watched her manage a difficult tenant's wife who came to the door in tears about her husband's drinking. He watched her write letters at the little desk in the morning room. Dozens of letters. Some of them in her own hand, and some dictated to the housekeeper, on estate matters that Alistair had not yet found time to address. He watched, and he did not speak. But one day in June, he stopped Alistair in the corridor and said, "Your Grace, forgive me. Her ladyship has asked whether the roof of the tenant house at Farring's Wood might be repaired before winter. I told her the funds were tight this year. She asked if she might use her own pin money for it. I did not know how to answer." Alistair had looked at him for a long moment. "Answer her yes." And Renton, "Your Grace, take the funds from the estate, not from her. Do it quietly. Do not tell her." "Very good, Your Grace." Renton had bowed and had walked away, and something in the set of his shoulders had been different than it had been the day before. There was a woman in the county called Lady Corliss Marston Weir. She was not related to old Marston the gardener, though the name amused Vivienne when she first heard it. Lady Corliss was a widow of about 40, who had wished, once, to be the next Duchess of Ashwold. She had wished it plainly, and she had thought her wishing sufficient, and when Alistair had married a girl from Wiltshire that no one had heard of, Lady Corliss had taken it as a personal wound. She came to Ashwold in early July with 3 friends, and an invitation from the Duke himself to dine. Alistair had not in fact invited her. His mother's sister had invited her at the aunt's country party the week before, and Lady Corliss had chosen to interpret that invitation as extending to Ashwold Hall. Vivienne received them in the drawing-room. She wore a gown of pale grey silk. Her hair was simply dressed. She rose when they came in, greeted them by name, offered them tea, and sat back down. Lady Corliss looked at her. She looked at her for a long time. She was a handsome woman with a mouth like a bow drawn tight. She looked at Vivienne's simple gown and simple hair and simple hands and small collection of rings, and she smiled. "My dear Duchess," she said, "you have made such a charming little effort with the drawing room. So very rustic. So very like a country parsonage. I remember when Ashwold used to be spoken of as one of the great houses of England. But of course fashions change, and every generation must arrange things to suit its own limitations." There was a small silence. Vivienne set down her cup. She did not blush. She did not stiffen. She looked at Lady Corliss with the same open, level gaze with which she had looked at Tom Aldridge in the wet grass 3 months before. "I did not know, Lady Corliss," she said, "that a country parsonage was thought a slight. My father is a country vicar. His parish house is smaller than this drawing room, and my mother taught me to keep it, if Ashwold has been arranged to suit my limitations. Then my limitations are that I would rather my guests be warm than that they be impressed. Would you like more tea?" Lady Corliss's mouth opened and closed once. Alistair was standing in the doorway. He had come in during Lady Corliss's speech and had not been noticed. He was very still. He was looking at Vivienne with an expression that would have alarmed Lady Corliss more than the speech had, if she had turned her head to see it. "Corliss," he said. Lady Corliss turned. Her face changed. "Your Grace, we were only saying, I heard what you were saying." He crossed the room. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "You are speaking to the Duchess of Ashwold. You will remember that, when next you address her, or you will not address her again. Have I made myself clear?" "Your Grace, I did not mean. Have I made myself clear?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Good, have your tea. Then I imagine you will wish to be on your way. The roads are long." He did not sit down. He stood at the mantelpiece, one hand resting on the marble, and he did not look at Lady Corliss again. Lady Corliss and her friends drank their tea very quickly, and they made their farewells, and they went. Vivienne saw them out at the door with the same courtesy she had shown them coming in. She stood on the steps until their carriage had turned the sweep and vanished behind the beeches. Then she came back into the drawing-room. Alistair was still at the mantelpiece. "You did not need to do that," she said. "I know I did not need to. I would have managed her. I know you would have." "That is not why I did it." She looked at him. She waited. "I did it," he said, "because I have stood at that mantelpiece for 6 years, while women like her said unkind things in this room, and I never once thought to stop them. I thought them not worth stopping. I am beginning to understand that not stopping is not the same as not caring. It is only easier." He said all of this without turning to look at her. His hand on the marble was very still. Vivienne did not answer for a moment. Then she crossed the room and stood beside him at the fire. "Thank you," she said, quietly, "for the 2nd time this month. You do not need to thank me." "I know," she said. "I am doing it anyway." He turned his head at last, and this time he did smile. A small smile at the corner of his mouth, and he said nothing at all. Summer moved on. Tom Aldridge got up out of the Blue Room's bed in the middle of July and walked, slowly in the garden. By August he was going down to the stables again, though not to lift or carry. Alistair had spoken to the head groom, and Tom had been put to the task of talking to the young horses, an old huntsman's trick. Sitting quiet in the corner of a stall until a nervous colt learned that a human voice did not always mean a bit or a whip. It was work he could do with one arm. It was work he was good at. He was, Vivienne discovered, a boy who had always loved horses more than he had loved himself, and now for the first time in his life he was allowed to say so. She kept her promise. Molly Aldridge's wages were doubled. The doctor was paid. A tutor was engaged, an elderly gentleman from the village called Mr. Peabody, to teach Tom his letters 2 afternoons a week in the small library. Vivienne did not tell Alistair about the tutor. Alistair found out about it from Renton, who found out about it from Mrs. Belden, who had been asked to arrange the library fire for the lessons. Alistair did not object. He added a 2nd afternoon of arithmetic and paid for it out of his own account, and told Renton not to mention it to anyone. There is a thing that happened in August that Vivienne did not know about for nearly a month. The blacksmith in Belford village had a daughter of about 7 who had been born with a lame foot. Alistair rode down to Belford once a fortnight on estate business. In August he stopped at the blacksmith's, ostensibly to have a horseshoe checked, and while he was there he stood for a long time, watching the little girl playing in the yard, half hopping on her lame foot, laughing. He said nothing to the blacksmith at the time. 2 weeks later, a man arrived from York. He was a maker of surgical shoes. He had been commissioned to make a shoe for the blacksmith's daughter, at no cost to the family, and to return every 6 months for the next 5 years to remake it as her foot grew. He would not say who had commissioned him. The blacksmith asked and asked, and the man from York was polite and firm and would not say. Vivienne heard about it from Mrs. Pell in the kitchen, who had heard it from her cousin who was married to the baker in Belford. Mrs. Pell told the story as a wonder, as a piece of goodness fallen out of the sky. She did not know who had done it. Vivienne sat at the kitchen table with her hand around a mug of cooling tea, and she listened to the story to its end. Then she thanked Mrs. Pell, and she went upstairs. She stopped Alistair in the corridor on the way to his study. "Did you?" she said, and stopped. "Did I what?" "The blacksmith's daughter. In Belford." "Did you?" He looked at her. His face did not change, but she saw a very small colour come up along his jaw. "I do not know what you mean," he said. "You do know. I do not wish to speak of it. I am not asking you to speak of it. I am asking you to admit it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "It is a small matter. Do not make it a large one. It is a very large matter to the child. That is her business. It is also mine now." "Why?" "Because," Vivienne said, "I did not know, before, that you did such things. I know now. That is not a small matter." He looked at her. She looked at him. The candles in the corridor guttered a little in a draught from somewhere below. The house creaked around them the way old houses do at evening. He said nothing. She said nothing. After a long moment he inclined his head, a fraction only, and went past her into the study and closed the door quietly behind him. She stood in the corridor for a long time. In September the harvest came in. Ashwold's tenants had a good year. The barley was heavy, the wheat was clean, and the farmers came to the great house one after another to pay their rents and take a mug of the Duke's ale in the hall. Vivienne stood beside Alistair in the great hall and shook the hand of every farmer who came in, and she remembered the name of every wife and every eldest son. She had studied them over the summer. She had walked out to their farms with a basket over her arm and asked after their children. It was not a strategy, it was simply how she had been raised. But the tenants noticed, and the tenants talked, and by the time Michaelmas came, there was not a farm on the Ashwold estate that did not speak of the new Duchess with something warmer than respect. Renton the butler stood at the door on the evening of Michaelmas and counted the empty ale jugs and the empty plates, and he said to Mrs. Belden, quietly, as they closed up the hall for the night, "I was wrong about her. Mrs. Belden looked at him. She did not smile. She was a woman who did not smile often, but her eyes crinkled a little at the corners. "Yes, Miss Renton," she said. "You were." Renton did not defend himself. He put out the last of the candles in the hall and walked up the back stairs to his own room. In the morning he went to the little morning room where Vivienne wrote her letters, and he stood in the doorway until she looked up. "Your ladyship," he said. His voice had the roughness of a man who had rehearsed a thing and did not quite trust the rehearsal. "Mr. Renton, I owe you an apology." "Do you?" "In February," he said, "when your ladyship first came to Ashwold, I said in the servants' corridor, within your ladyship's hearing. I know it was within your ladyship's hearing, because I heard your ladyship's step, that your ladyship would not last. I said it in those words. I said it more than once. I was wrong, and I have been wrong every day since, and I have never spoken of it to your ladyship, because I did not know how, and I do not now know how, but I would like your ladyship to know that I know it, and that I am sorry." Vivienne set down her pen. She looked at the old man in the doorway, at his stiff back and his very clean coat, and his hands that were folded together too tightly in front of him. She thought about the pantry in February, and the sound of his voice through the door. "Mr. Renton," she said. "Thank you for saying so. Please come in and close the door." He came in. He closed the door. "You said," she said, "that you had been at Ashwold 41 years, and that you knew the ones who stayed and the ones who did not. Do you still know? Your ladyship, I am not asking to shame you. I am asking. Do you still know? He was quiet. Then he said, I am not certain, your ladyship, that I ever did. I said what I said because I had seen many people come and go, and I had grown proud of my seeing. Pride in an old servant is a poor thing. It costs nothing to say a thing that sounds wise. It costs a great deal to be proved a fool. You are not a fool, Mr. Renton. I was one. In February. And now? Now, he said, I am your ladyship's servant. You were always my servant, Mr. Renton. Not always, your ladyship. Now she looked at him for a long moment. Then she rose from the desk and crossed to him and offered him her hand. He took it. His hand was old and dry, and it trembled a little in hers, and she pressed it once, firmly, and let it go. Thank you, she said. That will be all. He bowed and went. She watched the door close. She sat back down at her desk. She picked up her pen. She did not begin to write for some time. Autumn deepened. The moors turned the colour of old copper. The rooks came home to the elms by the east lawn every evening, calling in their harsh voices, and Vivienne could hear them from the morning-room window as she wrote her letters, and she came to think of the sound as one of the good sounds of Ashwold, alongside the low bell of the tall clock in the hall and the crackle of the fires that were kept lit now against the coming cold. She and Alistair began, without either of them speaking of it, to take breakfast together. He had for years eaten in his study, standing, with a book propped against the inkwell. He had begun in October, without announcement, to come down to the breakfast room at 8 and to sit at the table opposite her. She did not comment. He did not comment. Mrs. Pell in the kitchen sent up 2 plates instead of 1 and did not comment either. They spoke over breakfast about the estate, about Farring's Wood, whose roof was now repaired, about the new lambs that would come in the spring, about a letter from Alistair's cousin in London who wished to visit, about the price of coal. They did not speak of themselves. But in the evenings in the drawing-room, after dinner, Alistair had begun to bring his book down from his study and to sit in the chair opposite hers by the fire. He read. She read. Sometimes they read the same book, one after the other, and sometimes she found a note in the margin of a page in his hand, a small note, a question or a thought. And she would answer it in the margin below in her own hand and hand the book back, and neither of them would speak of it. In the last week of October a letter came from London. Vivienne's uncle had written. Her father, the country vicar of the small parish in Wiltshire, was ill. The doctor did not know if he would last the month. Would she come? She read the letter in the morning-room. She sat very still with it in her hands. She did not weep. She had not seen her father in 7 months. He was 68. He had married her mother late. She was his only child. She rose and went to find Alistair. He was in his study. She knocked. He said, "Come in." She held out the letter. He read it. He set it down. "When do you wish to leave?" he said. "As soon as the carriage can be readied. I will have it done in an hour. Take Molly Aldridge with you. She will manage Tom's absence for a week. The head groom knows what to do. Take Mrs. Belden also. I will send word ahead to the inns. You do not need to. I am coming with you." She looked at him. "You do not need to," she said again. "He is your father," Alistair said. "I have not met him. It is past time I did. If he is well enough, I would like to meet him. If he is not well enough, I would like to be beside you. Either way, I am coming." She stood in his study with the letter in her hand and the taste of iron in her mouth, and she found she could not speak for a moment. "Very well," she said, when she could. "Thank you." He looked at her with the same steady, unmoving gaze he had turned on her in the field in April. "You do not need to thank me," he said. "I know," she said. "I am doing it anyway." They drove south the next morning. The roads were bad. The rain had come back. They stopped at 3 inns on the way, and at every inn Alistair saw her to her room and brought her tea himself before he went to his own. And he did not once try to speak of anything larger than the road and the weather and the horses. They reached the parsonage in Wiltshire on the 4th day. Her father was still alive. He was in his bed in the low plaster-walled room at the back of the parsonage. He was very thin. His hair, which had been brown when Vivienne was a child, had gone entirely white. He looked at her when she came in, and his face changed, and he lifted one hand, and she came and knelt by the bed and took the hand and pressed her face against it, and did not speak. Alistair stood in the doorway. The old man's eyes moved past his daughter and found Alistair. He looked at him for a long moment. Then he lifted his other hand, weakly, and beckoned. Alistair came into the room. He knelt on the other side of the bed. He was not a man who knelt to anyone. He knelt now. He took the old man's hand in his. "Your Grace," her father said. His voice was thin. "Sir, you have come. I have come. My daughter." "Yes, sir, is she?" The old man's breath was short. "Is she happy?" Vivienne, on the other side of the bed, did not look up. She kept her face pressed against her father's hand. She heard Alistair breathe, once, and then answer. "I am trying to make her so, sir. I have not always tried. I am trying now. I do not know if I have earned the right to promise you, but I will make you this promise anyway. I will be a good husband to her, or I will die trying to be." "You have my word." The old man closed his eyes. His mouth moved into something that was almost a smile. "Good boy," he said, so quietly Vivienne barely heard it. "Good boy." He lived 4 more days. He died at dawn on the 5th day, with Vivienne on one side of the bed and Alistair on the other. He went easily, as the old sometimes do when they have finished their work. Vivienne wept without sound. Alistair did not weep, but he did not let go of the old man's hand until it had gone cold in his. Then he stood and walked around the bed and put his arms around his wife, and she turned into him, and she wept into the front of his coat for a long time while he stood, and said nothing, and his hand at the back of her head was steady. They buried her father in the little churchyard of the parish he had served for 30 years. The village came out. Every soul in the parish came out. Vivienne stood at the graveside in a black gown and a black bonnet, and Alistair stood beside her, and when the coffin was lowered she did not sway, and when the earth was thrown she did not turn away. She thanked every villager by name as they filed past her. Some she had known as a child, some she had not seen in years. She remembered every one. Alistair watched her do it, and he thought of the field in April, and of the boy she had carried, and of the words she had said. "He is mine to carry." He understood her now. He understood how she had done what she had done at Ashwold, so quickly, so quietly. It was not a strategy. It was not a performance. It was the whole of who she was. A woman who did not put down what she had picked up. He was, he thought, the luckiest man in England, and he had been too stupid, for too long, to know it. They returned to Ashwold in the 2nd week of November. The house had been kept for them. Renton stood on the steps with the household behind him, and when the carriage stopped he came down and opened the door himself, and he offered his hand to Vivienne, and she took it. And he handed her down with a formality he had never once shown her before. "Welcome home, your ladyship," he said. "Thank you, Mr. Renton." She went inside. Tom Aldridge was in the hall. He was standing straight now, with only a slight favouring of the left shoulder, and he had grown 2 inches over the summer. He bowed to her. She stopped and set her hand on his good shoulder and looked at him for a long moment. "You have grown, Tom Aldridge." "Yes, my lady." "Are you well?" "Yes, my lady." "Good, come and see me in the morning. Mr. Peabody has left you a book, I think." "Yes, my lady." She went upstairs. Alistair followed. In the corridor outside her dressing room he stopped her, one hand at her elbow. So lightly she barely felt it. "Vivienne." She turned. "I said something," he said, "in April. To Renton. I said you would not last. I said it in those words. I did not remember saying it until the day of the boy. I remembered it then. I have not known how to tell you I said it. I am telling you now." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "You know. I heard him say it. In the corridor by the pantry. On the morning after my arrival. He said, 'She won't last.' I did not know then that he was repeating you. I thought he was speaking his own mind. But I thought about it later, after Michaelmas, when he apologized to me. Because a man like Renton does not invent an opinion about his master's wife in her first week. Someone gave him that opinion. I understood then. I have known for a month. You have known. Yes, and you did not. I did not what? Confront me. Reproach me. Anything? No. Why?" Vivienne looked at him for a long moment. The candles in the corridor moved a little in a draught. Somewhere below in the house, someone was laying a fire. She could smell the wood smoke coming up the stairwell. "Because," she said, "I did not need you to say it before you were ready to say it. I have been at Ashwold 9 months. I did not marry you for love, Alistair. I did not marry you at all, really. My father did. And yours. I came here with no expectation of being seen. I decided in February, in that corridor, that I would not be small in a house that expected me to be small. That was all the decision I needed. I did not need you to change your mind. I needed to hold my own ground until you did. If you did, and if you did not, I would still have held it." He was quiet. His hand at her elbow had not moved. He was looking at her as though he had never seen her. "You held it," he said. "Yes, you held it against me. Yes, and now I am not holding it against you. I am telling you what I did, because you have told me what you did. And because I do not wish to begin the 2nd year of our marriage with anything unspoken between us." He took his hand away from her elbow. He took it away not to withdraw, but because he needed it for something else. He took her hand in his instead. He lifted it, very slowly, and pressed his mouth against her knuckles, and held it there. Vivienne did not move. She could feel the roughness of his shave along the back of her hand. She could smell the cold of the outdoors still on his coat, and beneath it wood smoke and something like clean linen and something under that she could not name. Her breath was going in and out very slowly. Somewhere very far away the tall clock in the hall struck the hour, 6 low deep notes, and she counted them without meaning to. When he lowered her hand at last, he did not let go. "I have been," he said, "a very stupid man. Not always. Long enough." "Yes," she said, "long enough." He almost smiled. She almost smiled. Neither of them did. "Vivienne," he said, "I would like to try to be your husband. Not the man you were given, not the arrangement. Your husband, in every sense. I do not ask for an answer tonight. I do not ask for an answer at all. I am asking for the chance to earn one." She looked at him. She thought about April. She thought about the field. She thought about the boy in her arms and the words she had said. "He is mine to carry." She thought about the tutor Alistair had paid for without telling her. She thought about the little girl in Belford, hopping on her lame foot in the yard. She thought about the way he had knelt by her father's bed. "Alistair," she said. "Yes, you do not need to earn it." He did not understand at once. She saw him not understanding. "I have been watching you," she said, "as you have been watching me. It has been a slower thing than I had expected, but it has been going on. I have been watching you, and I have seen what you have done, and I have seen what you have stopped doing. I do not need you to earn a chance you have already earned." She saw him understand. He stood very still. He did not speak for a long moment. Then he lifted her hand again, more slowly this time, and pressed it against his cheek and closed his eyes. And she felt the small tremor go through him that a strong man makes when he does not wish to be seen trembling. "Thank you," he said. His voice was rougher than she had ever heard it. "You do not need to thank me." "I know," he said. "I am doing it anyway." She smiled. This time. He smiled. They stood there in the corridor a long time, hand against cheek, breath by breath, and neither of them moved. That was in November. The winter was long, as winters at Ashwold always were. Snow came heavy in December and did not leave until the middle of February. The house was warm. The fires were kept high. Tom Aldridge learned his letters and then his sums. Molly Aldridge was made second housekeeper under Mrs. Belden, which was a title Ashwold had not had before, and which was created specifically for her because she had learned, in the months of her son's care, that she was better at management than she had ever known. Renton, who had been butler for 41 years, taught her what she did not know, and taught her patiently, and did not once make her feel the size of what she did not know. Vivienne was with child by the end of February. She told Alistair on a morning when the snow was finally breaking, when the dripping of the eaves had begun outside the breakfast-room window, and a thin band of blue had appeared over the moor for the first time in weeks. He set down his cup. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then he came around the table and knelt beside her chair and pressed his forehead against her shoulder. And she set her hand on his hair, and neither of them spoke. The child, a girl, was born in October of the following year. They named her Anne, after Vivienne's mother, who had died when Vivienne was very small. She was healthy and loud, and had her father's dark eyes and her mother's quiet mouth. The night after the christening, when the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Alistair and Vivienne sat together in the drawing room by the fire. The baby was asleep upstairs in the nursery. The wind was in the elms outside. Somewhere in the kitchens, someone was washing the last of the christening plate. Renton had gone to bed. Mrs. Belden had gone to bed. Tom Aldridge, who was now 14 and an apprentice to the head groom, had gone to bed. The house breathed around them. Alistair set down his book. "I made a decision," he said, "in the field. In April, when I saw you coming across it with the boy. I did not know then that I had made it. I know now." Vivienne looked up from her own book. "What decision?" "That I would spend the rest of my life," he said, "trying to be worthy of the woman I saw crossing that field." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You have been. I am trying. I know." He looked at her across the fire. She looked at him. The clock in the hall struck 10, 6 low, deep notes and then a lighter one, and Vivienne heard it, and remembered a night in a corridor in November, and remembered the taste of iron in her mouth in a wet field in April, and remembered the pantry in February on the morning after her arrival, and remembered all of it, and set it all down inside her the way one sets down a stone. "Alistair, yes, come and sit with me." He came and sat with her. He set his hand on the back of hers, where it lay on the arm of her chair. She turned her hand over and laced her fingers into his. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The fire cracked. The wind moved in the elms. Upstairs their daughter slept and did not know she was safe. Because she was so new, she did not yet know what safety was, and did not need to. She had outlasted them all. She had outlasted the prediction, and the pantry, and the wet field, and the drawing room, and the winter, and every quiet doubt of every servant who had ever looked at her and thought her too small for the house she had come to. She had outlasted them by being, simply, herself, day after day, without shifting, without shrinking, without asking anyone for the ground she stood on. And in the end, without either of them saying it aloud, the ground had come to her.